Hey, welcome to the SelfActualize podcast, where we bring you insights from top performers, expert coaches, and founders working in the trenches. I'm your host, Amol Dost. I'm joined by my co-host and Amit Bakshi, who's also founder and CEO of SelfActualize.ai. Amit, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. All right. So today we're sitting down with Brian Lee. Brian is co-founder and CEO of Revenue Vessel, a company redefining how logistics sales teams win deals. So before launching Revenue Vessel, Brian spent nearly 6 years at Flexport, leading demand gen, sales management, and then go-to-market strategy, giving him a front row seat to what works and what doesn't work in high growth, high stakes B2B sales. Now he's a founder doing founder-led sales. Brian is navigating one of the most critical phases of the startup journey, how to build a repeatable sales motion from scratch while also closing deals himself. So we're going to unpack his journey from sales leader to founder and find out the biggest challenges of founder-led sales and get his playbooks that he's using to land those early big customers. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in. Brian, it's great chatting with you again. Thanks for joining us here on the Self-Actualize podcast.
Yeah. How's it going? Very kind words. Thank you.
Yeah. So Brian, let's just start with your journey. Like, let's start way back when you're an elite sales professional, now a successful founder and CEO. How did you first get into sales? Tell us about that journey. And then most recently, how did you get into the world of startups?
It's really funny. I didn't actually start as a salesperson. I never thought that I would go into sales. So really the story goes that it was 2017. I had just graduated from college. All the investment banks and all the consulting firms rejected me. So I couldn't do any of that. And then luckily, like in 2017, this was the age of Airbnb and a bunch of like machine learning was huge. And there was a hype bubble around big data and those types of things. So I had actually applied to be a data scientist at a bunch of places, wasn't technical enough. And then as luck would have it, the top company on the breakout list that wasn't hiring any technical talent was Flexport, where it's a heavy operations orientation. There's a lot of different people. There's a lot of business people that were needed. So I ended up just at this company, Flexport. It was 300 people at the time or something like that. And then I stayed there for a really long time, grew to 3,000 people and saw a lot of things in the meantime. When I first started out at Flexport, I've always been a guy who doesn't have a great filter. And that was definitely very much true before I was calibrated and refined. And still debatably, I'm not the most calibrated and refined, but um, definitely they didn't, my team was like, hey, don't put Brian in front of client facing people, right? They're like, don't put Brian in front of clients. And really, like, what I was very interested in, though, was data. And through a lot of different projects, what I kept on coming back to in my mind was just like, what are the campaigns and the things that we can do to make Flexport more money? And I was always thinking about like trying to find creative ways to upsell. That was my passion at that time. And eventually what happened was you get closer and closer to the revenue. Like there was a role that I went into in 2020, which was how do you combine, how do you give salespeople all the accounts to reach out to. And eventually it just became, damn, if you want to actually make money for the company, you have to just do it. And that is the best way to do it. There are no people in the meantime that you can get frustrated by. If you sell it, that is the easiest way to do it. So eventually, like I just started selling that way. And then I would say that like, being a founder and selling myself has given me like the true sales education. Like there was a stop at Hadrian where I was selling a little bit to aerospace companies and defense, and that's a whole different sale. But it's something that, yeah, I learned the sales motion at Flexport. I learned how Flexport sells. Flexport is not a software company. They sell freight, and that's in itself different than software, right? And we can go into the differences,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's how I ended up here.
So that's interesting. So you actually started more, I would say, in like the programs and plays, go to market, which maybe almost like sales enablement or rev ops, like which accounts to go after, how to
Yeah.
enable the sales team using data. And then you started there and then made the switch into sales. You're like, well, I'm enabling the sales team, but honestly, I can just do this myself anyway. I could probably do this better myself. anyway? Is that kind of the transition you made?
Yeah, yeah. If we want to double click into that, like the hard part about RevOps and freight is that there's a relatively narrow serviceability in freight. So like there's tons and tons of containers and air freight that comes into the US every day. Some of it comes from China, some of it comes from Canada, at least for now, and if Donald Trump has anything to say about it. Some comes from Mexico, right? There's all these different regions, and you have a highly specialized group of people and companies that service each of those individual niches. So Flexport isn't really a niche. The largest trade lane in the world is China to the US. And really like Flexport's focus for the first years of its life, and even now debatably, is just who is coming from China to the US. And my job was figuring out at scale, how do you figure out all of those shippers who are coming into the US, right, from China? And that's like a derivation of what Revenue Vessel is today, is just helping companies do that. But that was really the challenging part about Flexport in a way where it's like, if you're selling SaaS or if you're Salesforce, your serviceability is pretty much everyone in the US. Any business that sells to other businesses, it's wider. And then eventually, yes, eventually what I learned is that I know a lot about Flexport. I know a lot about how to actually mechanically move a shipment. That actually played in very helpful to how to sell. And then eventually the question is, how do you get aggressive enough to close deals?
Yeah.
And that's slightly different.
Yeah. So question for you on that. Taking the unconventional route, you get sometimes you get bucketed into a certain type of perception that's hard to get around when you take the unconventional route to sales. So for instance, me personally, I spent the first 8 years of my career in consulting in the aerospace and defense world. And then I made a switch into tech, but I started as a sales engineer. And then I got into sales after that. But I took a roundabout or unconventional way into sales. And it was hard for people to look at me initially as a salesperson. They want to bucket you into different buckets, whether it's a sales engineer or a consultant, or in your case, more of the sales enablement or programs in place or go-to-market person. So how did you overcome that? Did you see that as a challenge yourself, as far as being perceived a certain way that's not as a seller? And if so, then how did you get that mind share in Flexport? How did you pivot that into that first sales role?
I would never say that I was stuck. It was something that I was always aware of, where I was always a data guy. I also think, I'm an Asian American, I'm a Chinese American guy. I don't think that there's that many Chinese people. Like, that's sales is not the first
Yeah.
career that generally people of my in my profile would go to. So I think that all of those are true. I think the only way, like, I didn't really think about it because I was so excited. Uh, It's the most addictive feeling to see someone sign a contract
Mhm.
and start to move a deal. And what kept on pushing me was just, how many deals could I get signed? And eventually, like, we had this celebratory channel in Slack at Flexport where all the deals came through, and everyone would start to see my name all the time. Granted, I was closing smaller deals, so like I had a lot, but everyone was seeing my name pop up. So eventually, like, no one really questioned that I could sell because they kept on seeing my name as a winner. And there's a lot of like challenges that this was during COVID. And once I tested positive for COVID, and I was just like, all right, let me line up as many calls as I can the next
Yeah.
day because I want to see how many deals I can close while I have COVID. I think like I played all these games with myself to win, but really at the underlying thing is just like, if you win, no one really questions it.
Yeah. Right.
And how do you get to winning?
How did you get the shot though? Like, so for instance, as a sales engineer, like I knew I could do the job. I knew more about the tech and more about sales than all of the salespeople that I was working with, but I still had to convince a district manager or a director of sales to give me that shot. So how did you see a challenge in that as well? Or how did you make that jump from like the go-to-market or programs in place role into like the official account executive role?
Yeah, I think that I didn't really convince anyone. So what happened was my boss at the time was this guy Ted, and Ted, like, I just got lucky with Ted as a manager. I've gotten lucky with all my managers, but eventually, like, there was a question in operations on who do I transition to as my next in the next team. And this guy was Ted. And it turned out that his scope started really small as a leader for development reps, SDRs. And then eventually, like, he just started taking on more and more scope. And as his scope increased, his responsibilities increased. And this inner circle of trust was very super important, right? And what I had proved to him was that if there is any challenge, I can solve that challenge. So eventually, like, there was this one guy, Noah Stewart, who eventually became my co-founder of Revenue Vessel, but he got promoted to a different role and his team was vacant, right? And for the longest time, we were just like, okay, I was brainstorming with Ted, what do we do about this fact that Noah's leaving, Noah's getting promoted? This was a role where we would be leading sales reps. It wasn't, there's always this conversation on, do we go internal or do we go external, right?
Yeah.
And bringing a replacement there. And what we determined was that, like, okay, well, actually, you can sort of cover for the fact that you don't really have these specific domain specific skills. You understand Flexport, and that's way more important than anything else. So because I understood that, he was like, hey, it should be you. And I was like, wait,
Yeah.
it should be like maybe one of 10 other people. But then eventually we were like, no, it should be me. And then in addition, it loops into this other mission that I had, and running this like end-to-end SDR with, um, you know, all the way through to the closing of smaller deals was like this motion that we had wanted to figure out, and we wanted to figure out onboard. There was a bunch of other stuff that we wanted to do. Eventually, that's why he said, hey, you should do it. And then I had to ramp up quickly on the processes, what Salesforce looked like on the user side. That was a lot of the learning there. But I didn't feel like I had to convince him because, I was the only option he had. Is probably the better way to say it.
Also, you built a champion, right? You built somebody who trusts you. Just like in a sales campaign, you got to build a champion, someone who's going to pound on the table and talk about your solution when you're not in the room. You need that internally as well. And ideally, that's your boss or some influential leader in the organization that's going to look past the unconventional route and say, well, this is the person that is going to be the best fit for the job. Right? That's kind of how I did it too. I was lucky enough to have a great leader, an internal champion.
Yeah. Well, I think that ultimately the way that I've thought about this is that when you're taking on a lot of new responsibilities, you want to limit the degrees of freedom. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say that you had a VP of sales role that was open. Well, you're not going to get someone who is a very senior and even brilliant person from outside the company who's never done sales, because there's too many things that they need to learn. They need to learn the company, the industry, they need to learn sales, and then they need to learn leading people, right? And all that stuff was really hard. I had everything except for the ability to sell. And that's what gave him a lot more confidence to do that. And I would say, like, even when you don't I think that a lot of people will think about it from oh, I'm not supported because I don't have a champion or a mentor in the company. And I feel like that's fundamentally the wrong way to look at it, because I think that the better way to look at it is, okay, what are you doing such that you are the perfect person for the role? Did you do everything that you can do? Sometimes you're going to lose a coin flip between you and two other people, but as much as you can, it's not about who is giving me the opportunity. It's what are you doing to make yourself worthy of the opportunity?
But they're also related, because building, just like in a sales campaign, it's on you to build that champion. It's on you to build that person that influential person that's gonna give you the shot or move the deal. And part of that is getting the right experience, reducing those degrees of freedom, reducing that risk, so that you're building the champion. So yeah, very true. But those things are also related. So yeah, let's talk about the startup journey. What made you want to go the CEO and co-founder route? What made you want to jump in and start Revenue Vessel?
I don't know if I ever really, it's funny because Danny, my other co-founder, and I, when we had first started this company, I told him, like, hey man, I don't really want to be a CEO. I feel like I'd make a great number 3 person in the company, but here we are. And I would say that the story behind what happened was I learned at Flexport that this was actually a problem, because what we would do to find different accounts is that you have a lot of data on who all the shippers are, all the ocean importers into the US. You combine that with contact, I had a team in the Philippines, like just combing through all these pieces of information to clean it up and then putting it into Salesforce. And it was like an exhausting process, man. And the fact that I was a single point of failure just showed me how important this was. And um, so maybe like a year and 3 months ago, Danny and I had been, Danny was a very close friend of mine, and we were just going back and forth on different ideas of companies that we could start. And it was more of like a fun experience for me. Danny had just quit his job at Rudder, and I was still at Hadrian, but like we would always talk every weekend, and this is just what I like to do anyways. But then as we were brainstorming ideas, I was like, hey man, I have this like one idea, this one thought. And it was like, how do you gather all this data for freight forwarders and customs brokers and these logistics companies? And if you put together all of the data together and we give all the information on their imports, their contacts together, maybe that's an idea. And he's like, okay, cool. If you can do that, then I'll work on it with you. And so what I did was I gathered a list of like 200 different customs brokers. And all I did that winter break when I had spare moments with my family was just like typing up emails, pressing schedule send. And I was like, okay, there's a decent chance that no one responds. But then, January 3rd, January 4th rolls around. A bunch of people responded to me at a very good rate off of a cold email. We had no website. We had nothing. We had no product. We had no visibility into the world. People were responding all the way up until like these huge multinational billion-dollar companies, all the way down to like small mom and pops. Were all saying like, yes, let's meet. And so we met with them without even a product. And from there, we started growing. And there was one customer in particular who early on was like, dude, you're charging way too little money for this. Like, this is crazy. So we started by charging $50 a month. Then we went to $100 on the next call, then 150, then 200. And then eventually he's just like, dude, I would pay 10K for this at least. And from there, then we started to be like, oh, okay, cool. Like, we're in business. From there, I left Hadrian, I quit and joined Danny full time. And then just we've continued building and we've been on this journey ever since.
It's incredible. So let me ask you this. What was the response rate on those emails?
Yeah, so it was between 3 and 5%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
And they were not best practice. They were quite terrible. In fact, I think that they're kind of funny. But yeah.
And why did you go email versus like LinkedIn? And how did you get these people's emails?
So I tried to do this via LinkedIn. I actually got LinkedIn Premium so I could message people in mail. No one responded. So then I just found people's emails through Apollo. Apollo does it for free. And we can go through the exact plumbing of how I set this up and just the cost, because you can do this all for less than like $300, $200 to get started. And so I did that through Apollo and just I emailed them and that was what worked. So we have just kept it on.
And it was the same message that you sent in LinkedIn, and you sent it in email and you got the responses in email and no one responded in LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's correct.
What do you think?
I think now I get messages back on LinkedIn, but that's different because now I actually have a presence on LinkedIn. We have customers, we have people who trust us.
So I guess what's been like the biggest surprise for you doing Revenue Vessel and founder-led sales at Revenue Vessel versus the sales you did, Adrian, and also like FlexPort? Like, what's been the biggest surprise? Was it getting the responses off of the cold email?
That was surprise. It wasn't super surprising now that I think back to it. Just like given how I understand people's workflows nowadays, it wasn't super surprising. I would say that what's surprising is why people sign up. And I think that it's interesting because there's been this transition, like getting people to respond to you is one thing, and that's how you know that you have something. That's way different than getting someone to say, yes, I will give you money for this service. And I would say that the difference between that is just, mechanically, obviously people need to have an ROI. There needs to be a business case. That's like all of the, if we were to go through the motions, we would talk about that. I would say that what motivates people to do that is number one, one of the most promising things actually is whether or not they believe in us as people. I think that like, there's a lot of people who I'm pretty close to now who I really enjoy talking to. And I think that a lot of times they'll look at us and be like, wow, this is what I wanted the industry to be when I joined this industry. I believe in what these guys are doing. They have what it takes. They're talented. They're smart. And that's actually what gives them the motivation to go through all these motions on ROI, making the case internally. And that was a big surprise that like, oh, that could be a reason, you know? And obviously all the other things need to be true. Like we have to actually add value to what they're doing. But that's what I learned. And that's what we lean into a lot.
If you got a question.
Yeah. So Brian, so unlike you, I actually don't come from a sales background, but I'm a founder. What advice do you have for me as founder and CEO on balancing sales and product development and fundraising? And how would you advise that I structure my time and priorities to make sure that sales doesn't take a backseat?
So for us, I think sales is the most important thing to an early stage startup. Like we were selling before we had a product. We were selling before we had an interface. We were selling just Excel spreadsheets and we had customers. For us, I don't think that anything could ever take a back seat. I think that different founders have different strengths. My strength is in the demand gen aspect. I don't have a strong product sense or a tech sense. And that's why, you know, we have Danny and Noah together. Noah has extremely strong product sense. Danny's an extremely strong engineer with also strong product sense. And it's not like if there's no option for me to take a backseat on sales because that was like the thing that I could do. I would say that but what I will say is that regardless of what you're good at, including if it's sales, no one likes doing cold outreach. And I would have to force myself to write 50 emails a day, at least, and make 40 dials a day to get the initial business. And even when I was super tired and frustrated and I didn't sleep well the night before, the last thing that I wanted to do was talk to strangers who were going to hang up on me. And it's something you just have to force yourself to. It's just like eating vegetables. You have to do it. So that's like, and this is something that I tell a lot of founders is just, hey, what will it take for you to write the email, write 50 a day? I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And in order to actually get any responses, like if you think about a 3 to 5% response rate on 50 emails, that's like 1 or 2 responses that you're getting from one batch of emails. So there actually wasn't that much for me to do. And I was actually spending more time on product stuff because I would talk to Danny about it and we were developing V1. But it's really something you have to force yourself to do if it's something that's not natural. And I always try to write LinkedIn stuff as well, but that actually didn't mean anything or take off unless you have some pre-existing presence. Even if you write the smartest stuff, I think that I was writing smarter stuff many months ago than I am now. I get more engagement now because just more people trust what I have to say. Does that answer your question? I hope that helps.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'd love to hear more about that playbook of those first 200 reach outs over that winter break. So you obviously identified your ICP. You had your list of prospects, the 200. You used Apollo to get the emails and get the phone numbers. And then were these manual emails or did you use some sort of like automated outreach program to send the emails? Were you manually typing emails to the 200?
No. Yes. No, I was no automated outreach.
Yeah.
Nothing automated. I'm actually very against that for earlier stage. And the reason is because it's just like if you're putting AI, if you're using AI to automate a terrible process, if you don't know what you're doing, then you're automating something where you don't actually have a good process. It's not going to work. So like, I would say just V0, what did I do? Was number one, finding a domain. It was customsinfo.co was the initial email domain. I bought it for $25 on GoDaddy.com. It didn't even make a website, but then you go to Google Suite for $20 per seat. So it was just me. And then we paid $20 to actually enrich or to warm this domain up. So whenever you create a net new domain, it generally doesn't land in the inbox. Yeah. You have to have like 2 weeks of active people accepting your responding. And then there are services that will help you for 2 weeks. So altogether that was $60. And then Apollo was actually free to have all their emails. But then the last thing that we had was just some email tracker to track whether or not people open my emails. And that was another $20 per month. So all for like $80 and 2 weeks of time, we had that set up. And then from there, like I knew my ICP, and where I was ahead was I knew who I wanted to target and what they were likely thinking just because I was that person. And then what we did was I went in and found, 50 contacts a day, some at the same company of the specific profiles of people. And then I just like wrote up emails. I scheduled 50 to send. Once they sent, I would obviously reply to the people who responded. But then from there, I also tracked who was opening up all my emails. And then this is when I started to pay Apollo like $50 a month or whatever it was, because then I could find all their phone numbers and I called all the people who were opening up my email a lot. And that was the process that I did. And that's what eventually got people there. But from there, the reason why I find it very important to do it manually is because if you are, let's say you get 0 replies, you might have some hypotheses or theories on why you're not getting any replies. Like maybe you're reaching out to the wrong people or the wrong companies, or you're using the wrong messaging, right? Like maybe you're getting a ton of opens, but no replies. You need to know that. And you see that by like micro adjustments that you make every day. And now that like this has worked, now that this channel is actually a decent one that we've proven out, now we can start to add on more layers of automation and
Yeah.
other things and
You
outsource
have
that
to
to
do
other
it-
people.
You have to do it yourself first. If you start automating it from day one, you're kind of pushing the easy button. You're kind of taking the easy way out, or a cop out, if you will. You kind of have to dig the trench and understand it yourself, and then you could bring in automation later to dig the trench easier and program the machine because you've already done it and you know the
I
new.
also just, yeah, total. And I also just think it's less effective. Like I know some people who have sent out 20,000 emails and then they got like a 0.002% response rate. And it's like, they don't know what to do, right? Like, it's like, what do you do from there? Well, if you had done it manually, you would know, right? Like
Yeah.
you would know, you would have the next set of steps to do.
So how much were you modifying the 50 emails? Like how much personalization went into those emails? How much research went into typing up each one?
Um,
Was it the
yeah.
standard template?
So our internal database, like I did a light customization. So the data that we have and the data that we have the information that we have in our system actually gives data on their top customers, their ports. So I actually use that to customize the information. So I would see like for all these customs brokers, who are the top ports that they're shipping into. And then I just put that in the subject line. I was like, top importers into port 1, port 2, port 3. And for each customs broker that I was targeting, I changed those up. And then for the people who opened up my email all the time and they had like 3 to 10 opens on the email, which meant that they were forwarding it to their team internally, I followed up with, here is the customer list that we have that you are moving with. Here you go. And it's like, not everyone is going to have that degree of personalization, but it's more just like, how do you be relevant and fresh to what they're doing when you have an email inbox full of spam? How do you actually show up and go to the top and catch their eye? And I don't know what that looks like for all companies, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do.
And how many touch points were you using for someone who didn't respond? Let's say you sent an email, you don't get a response. What's your playbook? Is it email 2, email 3, phone call 1, phone call 2, LinkedIn 1, LinkedIn 2, back to follow-up email? Did you have like a workflow or like a playbook like that? And how many touch points did you use for a particular prospect that hasn't responded before you kind of give up on?
Not really a playbook, but what I ended up doing, I think that the flow that I got into was like, and this is like super broke, like stage 1 founder type thing. We didn't use Outreach or any of these other tools to send email sequences. But what I did was, what I found myself doing is 50 emails were sent. I'd go through all the responses in the morning. I sent them out for like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. my time. And then by the time I woke up, I would check to see if anyone had responded. Once I got back to everyone and scheduled some time to meet up, then the next step was, who is opening all of my emails? And from there, like, that's how I prioritize my time so that remember, I still had a full-time job at this point. So like once everyone was opening up all their emails, that's where I would hit next. I would try to find like some spare time in the day to just hit them with some calls. I also would like send them their customer list and see if that got them to respond. And in a couple of cases they did. Um, but then like I didn't find it deeply meaningful to like continue responding. I had an Excel sheet with everyone who I reached out to, but some people just like never open up the email and it's like, okay, maybe I sent one follow-up
Right.
tops.
You're not going to hit them up like 10 more times if they never open
Yeah.
up the email, basically. You're going to
And like,
prioritize.
and then my follow-up to them was often just like, oh, I can't get to these 50 emails today. So let me get like 20 net new ones and then 30 follow-ups. And I'll still hit my quota that I set for myself. Right. That's more of what I did.
What about cold calling? I mean, that's like the biggest, public speaking and cold calling is the biggest thing that puts fear into people's minds, even expert sellers. So did you find, did you have success with cold calling and how did that work? Most of the time people aren't going to pick up their phone, right? So how many times did people pick up the phone? If they didn't, did you leave a message? Did you follow up with a text? Do any of those work? I just love to kind of pick your brain on some of that.
Cold calling definitively works. Everyone should be doing it. In fact, like I don't know. So everyone who says that email is dead and cold calling is dead, I think just doesn't write good email copy and doesn't actually make calls. In my opinion, I don't know how you scale up emotion without that. And all of our ops, by the way, like 70% of Flex Sports ops are set via the phone. Most of our ops are set via the phone too. We have an SDR right now, Chris, who's doing all these cold calls. But like just to directly answer your question, cold calls, like roughly 6% of people, or I think it's like roughly a 10% connect rate. I think that it varies throughout the day. So like there were some days on a Tuesday at 11 a.m., I was getting a ton of connects. There were some days that I was calling at like 9 a.m. or noon in New York. That was like Eastern time, noon, and everyone says don't call at that time, but I got a ton of pickups. I think it's more about the discipline and the rigor to do it was super important. I would double tap. So like you call someone, they don't pick up, call them again and see if they pick up. And oftentimes they might. There's a decent chance that they might. So I would do that. And really like the game with cold calling is how do you get them on line one to talk to you and hear you out for more lines? And your presence as you deliver it is super important. Um, you can't come across timid. You just have to pretend that it's okay. And the best way to be okay with that and to get that vibe is just to do a lot and then have some success.
Repetitions. Yeah.
Exactly. But the hard part is block off an hour every day to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So what about if you don't connect, but you leave a voice? Do you leave a voice message or a text, or do you not bother? If you don't connect, you just
No.
call?
I never did that.
Just call
I
them.
never left voicemails because I didn't want them to know who I was. Like, right? Like I didn't want them to be like, oh, okay, this is someone who I don't want to talk to. Like, let me never pick up from this number again. Whereas like if you call over 4 days, like maybe they'll pick up at some point.
Yeah.
We're also in a market where we talk to salespeople and salespeople are always like, oh my God, like they're more willing to pick up numbers from different area codes because they're like, what if it's my customer?
What if it's a customer? Exactly. What if it's someone that wants to buy?
Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Why did you lead with the cold outreach approach versus, I guess, the warm approach or like events, as far as going to your LinkedIn and seeing who you know that could be within your ICP and reaching out to those people or going to events and meeting people that way? Or why did you go, or did you do that as well in addition to the cold outreach?
Well, I would have loved to be a rich, famous, good-looking influencer who had a ton of, different followers and got business that way. The reality is like I had some presence, right? And I had some story that people bought into where they were like, oh, he was at Flexport. This is very cool. Like, let me talk to this person. Sure. But by and large, it's not like the entire industry knew who I was. So you can't really do all these marketing things to get attention that way. And really cold outreach is the only thing that we knew. And then lastly, like we are a cold outreach company. Like we are like this company, we sell a solution to cold outreach. And if we can't do this ourselves, or we don't have the chops to do it ourselves, to me, like, we don't have a business being
You
in
don't
this
have the
business.
credibility. Yeah.
Exactly. So, like, in fact, the very fact that I reached out cold to a bunch of different people, like, I've still talked about it with them recently after they became customers. They were just like, "Whoa, how did you get to us again?" And I told them the methodology exactly like I told you, and I added more flavor on the
Yeah.
details that we had on their business. And they were like, "Oh, this is awesome. We appreciate you doing this." And now that's great, because that's their whole job, is to do that to their customers.
Yeah.
And like, our whole product is, how do we help you do that to your customer base? So like, the fact that we did that makes us cooler in their eyes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could keep kicking your brain about this forever. This is all super, super fascinating, and I'm learning a lot from this. I really appreciate it. But switching gears just for a second, you talked about pricing a little bit ago, as far as you started connecting with your customers, and it was like, hey, you're charging way too low for this. You went up to like $50 a month and $100 a month. Talk to us about that, because we're doing a little bit of that as well here at SelfActualize. We're kind of going like this a little bit with the pricing, and we think we're a little bit too low here. But what's your advice on pricing and positioning the product for an early stage startup? We're kind of making this stuff up.
I don't have any good advice except to keep doing it, right? So like, I mean, we could talk about your specific product and our specific product, and it's really just comes down to that. I would say a couple things. Number one is that we started off not really being very, like, I particularly was insecure about the value we were providing. We made it very clear that we had Excel sheets. We didn't have a platform. And so that's why we started super low. It was $50 a month for the entire company to use our data. And we still have, like, the customer that we sold $50 a month to, that's the last time we'll ever do that. And they still pay $50 a month.
So was it $50 a month per seat, or was it
No.
$50? It was just $50 a month.
It was $50 a month. Yeah. Yeah. We really screwed ourselves out of that one. And then the next, like, they said yes. It was like an immediate yes when we said that. And then the next company, we did 100, and then the next company was 150. And eventually people were like, then we said $400 a month. And then people started telling us no for that price. And we were like, all right, shit. Okay. Now we know our price. Eventually, like, what we sort of morphed into was, like, our next phase of pricing from there was, like, we had a platform. We had the platform built out. We were no longer just Excel sheets. We were told to raise our pricing. So now we started charging annual contracts. And the question was, how do we actually break down the annual contracts? And Danny had this belief, and I agreed with him at the time, which was like, I don't want to charge by seats. And we were against seats for a little bit, because we didn't want customers to lie to us about the amount of people who were using the product. And really, we thought that the consumption model that they would use our products was to download our data, because that's the way we thought about it ourselves. It was a database. We thought that they would be downloading our data, and that's how they would use it. So we wanted to monetize on the credits. Eventually, what we learned was that once we started to have contacts and companies together, we realized, like, and Noah at that time had joined us super early on. And he was like, dude, guys, this makes no sense. And the thing that he pointed out was that eventually you have a lot more people, like, some people had all of their salespeople using our data. They never downloaded the information. They got a ton of value out of looking at our platform and navigating through it and getting all the information they needed. So eventually we were just like, oh, crap, maybe we should just charge per seat. And we still do have a credit component to it. It's not one that we look to monetize. So, and that's like the evolution of pricing. And then there's some other nuances that we've added in over time. So like, as an example, we used to charge a credit for finding contact information on our platform, because we give context of who are the decision makers. And over time, we just stopped, because we didn't want people to stop using our product. We didn't want people to be like, oh crap, I only have 18,000 credits. Can I use one? And people were like thinking that, and they were worried about it, and we didn't want them to. So we just said, look, if you enrich contacts, it's part of the package. And then now it's like, so we've done pricing that way, but ultimately we went through a number of different iterations, and you really don't know until you try different things, because we made a bunch of mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Like, there's a bunch of customers. It's okay.
What about your sales process? So obviously you kind of talked about the warm out or the cold outreach and how you're able to get the meetings. You're on the phone with the customer. Obviously, you're selling yourself as much as anything else. They're buying into you. They're trusting you. Talk to me a little bit about that sales process. The first call, all the way to close, and then supporting the customer. Like, do you guys do pilots or POCs, or are there demos? Do you do a free trial? Like, what is that? What is the sales process that works for you guys, and how did you guys arrive at that?
Yeah. So we'll start with a discovery call. Like there's a discovery call, and generally like our product is good in that if they really have a deep challenge around this area, on like, oh, my reps aren't calling, and it's like, why? And it's like, well, because I can't find the leads. If they say that, it's just game over. They're gonna see our platform and they're gonna love it. So generally, it will start with a discovery call, and then we'll have what we call an evaluation step. And this is just the step before pricing that we have, where they want to loop in their manager, they want to loop in their rep to see if like this is legit or anything. So we'll have that step, and that just came out over time, where it was before they had really wanted to know pricing, but eventually they would ask about pricing, and that would be the third step that we had. Now, the interesting thing about pricing is that we have a distinct step for it, but um, I try not to gate pricing ever. So like I just try to give them like, here's the lowest that will go. It varies over time depending on what you're looking to do. I'm happy to do a more custom one, but it starts at this price. And I just find that like if you were to gate it too much, it sort of erodes trust. So I do that. And then from there, then it really depends on how they want to buy. So some people do ask for a demo, and we'll accommodate like a 1 or 2 week get onto the platform, play around with it. Some people are ready to buy, and they're just like, okay, I trust this because I've seen a lot of different companies that I know during this sales process. And you're right, you're on the money. So I'm going to buy this account. I'm going to buy with you, and they're ready to go. And then from there, there's all like legal negotiations and all that. That's pretty standard. Um, but I would say like over time, it was very different. Like early on, we did a 3-month POC, and we would never do something like that now.
Yeah.
Where even though it was paid for, like it sucked. It sucked to not know and to be on this end, but it's sort of just what you have to do to prove yourself before you're a real company. And in fact, like there was this one guy where who's a great champion of ours. I asked him directly. I was like, "Hey, if we were Zoom Info, would you have made us do this 3-month POC?" And he's like, "Honestly, no." And at some level, like you just have to prove that you're a company that is worthy of being taken seriously. And if they're going to take a risk on you and you do poorly, it's their ass on the line. You have to understand that um, you need to de-risk this as much as you can for those champions. And the better that they're seen internally, the better it is for you. And you know, it was a very tough time though. It was a very anxiety inducing time to be in these POCs and not know if they were going to convert.
Level do you guys start at? Do you start at the first line sales leader level, and then if that goes well, they kind of sponsor you up, or are the sales teams making the decision and they're finding the budget, or do they have to then kick you over to procurement and you got to convince it, who owns the budget? What level do you guys start off at, and who owns the budget for revenue vessel buys?
Always VP or C-suite if we can swing it. Sometimes obviously you can't, like you go to a conference and you meet the director of sales who's super excited about it, and that's fine. Like we'll manage up that way, right? And yeah, I mean VP and C-suite always is what we try to do.
If they have the budget, if they're bought in, they have the money that they can spend.
Yeah, or it's like that's generally procurement will come in when it's like they're evaluating or they're going through the legal process and they're doing all that, right? They're doing vendor security, risk analysis, things like that. But yeah.
You ever start at the IC or like the rep level for that first discovery call, and then they sponsor you up? Or do
No.
you always start at the leadership level?
I mean, I'll always take IC calls, especially like earlier on where I have a relationship. So there are many former reps at Flexport who left, but I never start with them. No. Like if I were reaching out to someone cold, never. Obviously there's like some people you pick and choose, right? Like some people have a lot of weight in the organization and they are ICs, and you can just tell that they do have a lot of weight. Sure, fine. But I mean, if I hop on a call with someone, I'm always going to go through the motion and sell to them regardless of that answer. But it's like, if you can control who you reach out to, why would you ever reach out to an IC? It also slows down the sales process when they're like, oh, let me get my manager on.
Right.
Oh, but this person has no availability. So like, let me push it out 3 weeks from now. And by then they've forgotten, or it's not a priority to the manager. It's always best. Like the VP and the C-suite are always the best at saying, this is the company level priority. You support us in this company level issue. I'm going to spend budget. And that's the delineation that needs to be made. And an individual line level rep that says, oh, my life gets a little bit better. You sometimes get false signal, because even if you reduce 30 minutes of time, if that's not something that people care about at the C-suite level, and you're not moving a company level goal, who cares?
But Brian, I have a few more questions about founders doing sales. So in the early days, how do you build credibility when you're an unknown founder of an unknown company selling something brand new?
I mean, eventually at the end of the day, you have to be just selling a product that people actually want, and you have to be solving a product that they want. And the best way that I knew that we were actually solving that problem was that people were responding to cold messages despite the fact that we didn't have a website. People were saying yes to us despite the fact that we had Excel sheets. So solve a problem that people want, and eventually you stumble your way in is the best way that I can say that. So there was this one founder who once told me, he was like, they're solving AI for they're building AI for customer success. And when they said that, I was just like, everyone's doing that, like, dumb idea. And they were like, no, 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 look, listen. When I first was talking to different CROs, they told us that this was the biggest problem. And then we said $50,000, and then eventually $100,000. And they were saying yes. And they were like, look, we're just two dudes off the street. If there's so much established companies in the world who can theoretically provide this, why are they buying from us?
Mhm.
So eventually, like, what I just realized was, that was inspirational to me. And what I just realized is that, like, look, I don't think it matters if you're nobody and you don't have anything in the space. Then, like, if you're solving a real need, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that is
They
inspirational.
just have to believe that you can do that.
Mhm. What's the biggest mistake you see founders making when they're trying to sell their product?
Honestly, automated outbound messaging is probably top of the list, especially for software engineers who have built something cool and they want to sell it. I think there is a whole practice to doing sales well. We have a sales coach, Morgan, who we're going to be on together next week on a podcast as well. Highly recommend that. She was awesome at Flexport, and that's who we trust. And she's just completely up leveled how we do sales.
Hmm.
Um,
We definitely
I
want
don't
to.
think
So we're all about connecting with great coaches.
totally. Yep.
Yeah, we got that
Yep.
on the calendar next. So it's going to
Yep.
be exciting to go through that. Well, excellent. Well, what along the lines of coaching and getting better, and what are some of the things that you do? I mean, obviously you've got the coach. What are some things that you do to try to get better at sales? Are you using ChatGPT, sending transcripts to get coaching, or are there books or podcasts that you recommend as far as improving your sales game? Like, what's worked for you from a self-development perspective?
Yeah. I think that the great thing about sales calls is that there's an instantaneous understanding of if you did well or not. And
Like a
like, you just
sport.
know, yeah, you just know when you hop off, like, oh, I did well versus like, that was mid versus that was terrible. And there's a lot of calls, I think, that founders hop on where they're like, that's mid. And you know that it's like just okay. You know that they weren't excited. And it's like when you interview somewhere, everyone has to love you. If you're competing for like a great job with a great reputation, everyone needs to love you in order for you to pass. And that's like the one way. And I think a lot of people confuse like tepid interest and like, oh, okay, this is cool, for, oh my God, yes. You need everyone to be an, oh my God, yes. And like, the more you can do that, the better. And what I work on with Morgan a lot is she helps me with like, here's how you connect the dots. Here's how you connect their pain to your demo such that they get an aha moment. So initially she was like, hey, you like add these slides. Like, you should have a
Right.
slide deck because you need a visual to help people understand how your solution does it. And then eventually, like, there's like a little dance that I've just gotten a lot better at. So from a self-development standpoint, it's really just like when I'm thinking about baseball players, they know based on their batting average if they're doing well. Like it's like a batting average game to me. If I go through a day of calls, I want like 10 out of 10 really good calls on 60% of them. And that's what I always try to do. And when I feel like it's not, those are the ones that I send over to Morgan.
Mm.
So she always gives me critical feedback because she's just like, dude, what the hell? Did I not teach you anything? And I'm like, no, Morgan, I promise I'm only sending you the really bad ones. But I would say that the biggest challenge that it came for me to sell and up level was how do you help more and more people get to the aha moment
Yeah.
during the call? And if you can get there, then they say yes. And that's different from being able to present or talk to people. That's an actual skill of you being able to put yourself in their mind, pick their brain to get their problems, and then position your service super well. That's a skill.
What about have you tried sending any of those transcripts to ChatGPT? Like you've got an idea if the call went well or not. Then you send to Morgan to get another assessment. Have you tried also sending it to ChatGPT so that you have 3 data points? It'd be interesting to see kind of how they line up.
Not really. I just haven't done it, mainly because I don't have the time, but also
Yeah.
just because we have Morgan, I
Right.
really don't feel the need, and I'd rather just have her comment on it. And what we'll do is we'll go through line by line and just go like, here's what I was thinking as we were doing this. She will comment like, hey, maybe you should have done this here. Like, this is what this line is telling me. And that's been the most helpful thing. And I just don't know if ChatGPT is at a point where it
Yeah.
can get to that point.
Yeah. It's hard to replace the real coach.
That's right.
Yeah. So Brian, where can people learn more about you and Revenue Vessel? If someone's interested in Revenue Vessel, how can they learn more? Should they contact you directly?
Yeah, they should contact me. It's brian@revenuevessel.com. You can also just follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I post all my stuff.
Right. Well, this has been terrific. We know you're a super busy guy as a founder, seller. Congratulations on all your success. This has been a super awesome conversation. I mean, I've learned a lot. I'm glad we got this recorded, so I don't have to sit here and take notes. But there's
Thanks,
a lot of, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
thanks so much,
gems in
Brian.
here.
Really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, of course. Talk to
Yeah.
you soon.
Yeah, and then we're looking forward to that next interview with you and Morgan. That's gonna be awesome too.
Yeah, I'm excited for that too. But it was great as always, great to talk to you guys.
All right, so to get more insights on founder-led sales, go-to-market strategy, and early-stage startup growth, and to get a virtual coach in your pocket, visit selfactualize.ai. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Self-Actualize podcast. All right, take care.